I died, choking on copper-tasting blood in a soundproofed basement, because my roommate thought it'd be a harmless joke to use my face on an underground dating app. When I woke up, gasping in our cramped dorm room, inhaling the suffocating scent of her cheap vanilla body spray, instead of my own decay, I didn't scream. I didn't drop to my knees, and thank God. I just rolled out of bed, picked up her unlocked phone, and quietly swapped the photo she was about to post. Let her have the attention she craved so desperately. Let her drown in it. The first thing you notice when you come back from the dead isn't the miracle of it. It's the sheer aggressive banality of the world that kept spinning while you were being unmade. I woke up with my fingers clawing at my own throat. The phantom sensation of a jagged edge slicing through my windpipe was so sharp, so absolute, that I choked on my own spit violently, thrashing against a thin, scratchy wool blanket. I rolled off the mattress. My knees hit sticky linoleum. Dust motes danced in a slanted beam of afternoon sunlight. From the attached bathroom, the shower ran. The faint, off-key humming of Taylor Swift cut through the rush of water. Leora. I stayed on the floor for a long time. My chest heaved. I pressed my palms flat against the cold floor tiles, anchoring myself to the dirt, the grime, the absolute reality of the dorm room. I wasn't in the basement. My fingernails weren't bent backward from scraping at a steel door. I was 19 again. The humming stopped. The water shut off. I dragged myself up my joints, feeling loose and unfamiliar. My eyes locked onto the glowing rectangle on Leora's cluttered desk. Her phone. It was nestled between a half-empty cup of iced coffee, sweating onto a textbook and a pile of unwashed makeup brushes. The screen was awake. I took 3 steps. They felt like walking underwater. I looked down at the screen. There it was. The app was called Oubliette. It wasn't on the standard app stores. You needed an invite code, a background check, and a bank account that looked like a telephone number just to browse. Leora had found a backdoor invite on a sketchy forum, desperate to bypass the frat boys and find a man who could buy her a penthouse. But Leora was a coward. She wanted the prize without risking the fallout of putting her own face on a dark web-adjacent meat market. In my last life, she used a candid photo of me studying in the library. Soft lighting. Unaware. Prime bait for the kind of men who hunted on oubliette men who wanted something quiet they could break. The upload screen was open. My face stared back at me, thumbnail-sized, ready to be submitted to the void. Her finger had probably been hovering over publish right before she decided to rinse the conditioner out of her hair. My hands shook. Not with rage, but with a bone-deep, rattling cold. The smell of her synthetic vanilla perfume hung heavy in the humid air, seeping from under the bathroom door. I didn't delete the profile. Deleting it would just make her curious. She'd try again tomorrow. She'd find another picture. Instead, I tapped the photo gallery icon. I scrolled past the selfies, the brunch plates, the heavily filtered group shots, until I found it. A picture of Leora, taken at a party last week. She was looking over her shoulder, lips parted in a breathless, manufactured laugh. The red lighting of the frat basement making her look flushed and entirely too available. It was exactly the kind of picture that screamed, "Look at me." I selected it. The thumbnail changed. My face vanished. Hers appeared. I hit publish. The app loaded for 3 seconds. A little green checkmark bloomed on the screen. Profile active. I set the phone down exactly where I found it, a millimeter away from the sweating plastic cup. I crawled back into my bed, pulled the scratchy blanket up to my chin, and turned to face the wall. The bathroom door creaked open. Steam billowed out, smelling of cheap coconut shampoo. Leora padded out in her towel, her bare feet slapping wetly against the linoleum. "Harper," she called out, her voice bright and careless. "You awake?" I kept my breathing steady, even, in and out. I heard her walk to the desk. I heard the soft tap of her acrylic nails against the glass screen. A long pause. "Huh," she muttered to herself. She didn't sound panicked. She sounded pleasantly surprised. Maybe she assumed she had selected her own photo by accident. Maybe her vanity immediately justified it. Why wouldn't she use her own face? She was beautiful. She was ready. I closed my eyes. The metallic taste of blood was finally fading from the back of my tongue. "Take them." I thought, the darkness pressing against my eyelids. "Take all of them." It started the very next afternoon. I was sitting on my bed, staring at a textbook on microeconomics, completely unable to comprehend the words. My brain felt like it was packed with wet cotton. Every time a door slammed down the hall, my shoulders flinched so hard my neck ached. I kept checking my pulse. I kept touching my throat. Leora, on the other hand, was vibrating with a manic, nervous energy. She had skipped her morning classes. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, her phone plugged into the wall charger because she was refreshing her notifications. So often the battery was draining. "This is insane," she whispered, gnawing on her thumb. "What is?" I asked. My voice sounded raspy. "Dead." She jumped, looking at me with wide, dilated eyes. "Nothing, just a guy I matched with. He's..." She bit her lip, suppressing a massive, triumphant smile. "He's sending a car for me tonight." My stomach plummeted. In the previous timeline, the first one hadn't sent a car. He had sent a box. To me. A car. I kept my tone flat, disinterested. "Where are you going?" "Dinner. Somewhere downtown." He wouldn't say. He just said to wear black. She hopped off the bed and practically ran to her closet, throwing hangers aside. "Harper, you don't understand. I Googled him." "Well, I tried. There's almost nothing. Just one article from a financial summit in Zurich. He's a ghost, but he's a billionaire ghost. Arthur." The name surfaced in my mind like a bloated corpse. Arthur Pendleton. In my past life, he was the first to find me. He liked quiet girls. He liked controlling the volume of the room. When I wouldn't speak to him, he cornered me in the campus library. When I tried to run, he had his driver run my bicycle off the road. "Be careful," I said. It was an automated response. I didn't care if she was careful, but if I acted completely apathetic, she might get suspicious. "You don't know him." "Oh, live a little harp," she scoffed, pulling out a sheer black slip dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. "You're always so paranoid." At 6 p.m., a heavy knock echoed through the thin wood of our dorm door. Not a tentative, polite knock. 3 sharp, measured strikes. Knuckles hitting wood with the weight of absolute entitlement. Leora squealed quietly, smoothing her dress, and yanked the door open. It wasn't Arthur. It was a man in a bespoke charcoal suit, holding a massive, obnoxious arrangement of black baccara roses. They were so dark, they looked like congealed blood. "Miss Leora?" the man asked. His voice was clipped. "A driver." "That's me," she breathed, taking the heavy vase. The thorns had been meticulously stripped, but the stems were thick and green. "Mr. Pendleton's car is waiting downstairs. He asks that you do not bring your cell phone." Leora blinked. "Wait, really? How will I?" "He values discretion," the driver said smoothly, "and undivided attention." I sat perfectly still on my bed, clutching a yellow highlighter so hard the plastic casing cracked against my palm. The smell of the roses flooded the room. It was overwhelming, earthy rich and rotting at the edges. It smelled exactly like the funeral I never got to have. Leora giggled a nervous, thrilled little sound. She threw her phone onto her bed. Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's go. She walked out. The door clicked shut. I was alone with the black roses. I walked over to her desk. I didn't touch her phone, but I looked at the screen as it lit up with a new notification. Dominic saw you walking out. The black dress is a nice touch, but he's boring. I'm not. My breath hitched. Dominic. He was the artist. The chaotic one with the trust fund and the penchant for setting fires, literally and metaphorically. In the last life, he was the one who broke into our dorm and painted my portrait on the wall using his own blood. He was already here, watching the building. I backed away from the desk. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to build a fortress. I dragged my duffel bag from under my bed and started throwing essentials into it. Clothes, cash, I had stashed my laptop. I wasn't running away, not yet. I couldn't afford to drop out, and running meant they might track me down as a loose end. But I wasn't sleeping in this room anymore. I walked over to the black roses. I reached out my trembling fingers, brushing the velvety petals. They felt like skin. I grabbed the vase and walked it straight to the trash can in the hall, dropping it in. The glass shattered at the bottom. Let the games begin, Leora. Better you than me. 2 days later, the air in the dorm had thickened into something toxic. Leora hadn't slept in 48 hours, but she didn't look exhausted. She looked manic-fueled by the kind of adrenaline that comes from standing in the center of a hurricane. She returned from her date with Arthur, sporting a diamond tennis bracelet that cost more than my 4-year tuition. She flaunted it, turning her wrist in the harsh fluorescent lighting of our room, completely blind to the fact that Arthur hadn't bought her a gift. He had bought a tracking collar. But Arthur wasn't the only one anymore. I was sitting in the corner armchair, sipping a mug of bitter black coffee. The heat of the ceramic burned my palms, grounding me. I watched her pacing. Dominic wants to take me to a gallery opening tonight, Leora was saying, talking more to the mirror than to me, as she applied a thick coat of mascara. But Christian texted. He said if I go with Dominic, he'll buy the gallery and shut the exhibit down. She laughed. It was a high, thin sound. Can you believe this, Harper? It's like I'm the main character in a movie. Christian. I repeated the name softly. Christian Hayes. The tech heir. Clinical. Cold. He didn't yell. He just ruined your life with an algorithm. In the last timeline, he wiped my bank accounts and isolated me from my family, just to see how long it would take me to crawl to him for help. Yeah, he's intense, Leora said, smacking her lips together to spread her gloss. But God, the power trip is insane. They're literally fighting over me. They don't know you, Leora, I said. I tried to inject a note of genuine warning into my voice just to absolve my own conscience. They're fighting over a profile, over an idea. Men like that don't share, and they don't lose gracefully. She stopped applying her makeup and looked at me through the mirror. Her expression hardened into a sneer of pity. You're just jealous, Harp. It's fine. Not everyone can handle this kind of lifestyle. You're safe here with your textbooks. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Right, I'm safe. A heavy rhythmic pounding rattled our door. Not Arthur's measured knocks. This was erratic, violent. Leora's triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She grabbed her phone. Dominic said he was coming up. He bypassed security. Before she could reach the handle, the door swung open. The lock snapped with a pathetic crunch. Dominic stood in the doorway. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Disheveled dark hair paint staining the cuffs of his expensive linen shirt, and eyes that burned with a feverish, unhinged light. He smelled like turpentine stale cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. "Dom," Leora gasped, stepping back clearly, caught off guard by the broken lock. "You can't just break the door." Dominic didn't look at her. His eyes swept the room, landing on me. My heart seized. My lungs forgot how to expand. The ceramic mug in my hands rattled violently against my teeth. He remembers my panicked brain, screamed. He knows it was supposed to be me. But Dominic's gaze slid past me as if I were a piece of ugly furniture. He turned his attention back to Leora. He stepped into the room, kicking the splintered door shut behind him with the heel of his boot. "Take it off," he said. His voice was a raspy purr. Leora crossed her arms defensively. "Excuse me." Dominic crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed her wrist, the one with Arthur's diamond bracelet. Leora let out a sharp yelp. "I said, take it off." Dominic whispered, his face inches from hers. "You smell like him. You're wearing his leash. I told you I don't share my canvases." "Dom, you're hurting me." Leora whined, trying to pull her arm back, but there was still a flush of excitement on her cheeks. She thought this was passion. She thought this was romance. I pressed myself deeper into the armchair. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I made myself small, invisible. I watched the monster who had once painted my walls in blood tighten his grip on my roommate. "I'll buy you 10 of these." Dominic sneered, unclasping the tennis bracelet with one deft movement. He let the diamonds fall to the cheap linoleum floor. They hit the ground with a dull, pathetic sound. "You're coming with me." "I can't," Leora breathed, looking down at the bracelet, and then back up at him, entirely captivated by his aggression. "Christian is—" "Fuck Christian," Dominic spat. He leaned in and pressed his face into her neck, inhaling deeply. Leora's eyes fluttered shut. Suddenly, a calm, digitized voice spoke from Leora's phone, which was resting on the desk. It wasn't a call. It was a live audio feed hacking through her speaker. "Touch her again, Dominic, and I will erase your trust fund before you can walk out of that building." The voice was crisp. Flawless audio. Christian. He had already hacked her phone. He was listening. Dominic froze. He slowly lifted his head from Leora's neck, a wide, terrifying grin spreading across his face. He looked at the phone. "Try it, keyboard warrior." Dominic laughed, a sharp barking sound. "You think money scares me." No Christian's disembodied voice replied smoothly. "But the arson charges from the Geneva Gallery fire will." The room went dead silent. The hum of the mini-fridge suddenly sounded like a jet engine. Leora looked between the phone and Dominic, her expression finally fracturing. The thrill was gone, replaced by the first creeping edge of real human terror. She realized in that split second that these men weren't playing a dating game. They were playing a war game. I quietly set my coffee mug down on the side table. I stood up, grabbing my duffel bag from the corner. Neither of them noticed me. They were locked in their sick, invisible triangle. I slipped through the broken door, stepping over the splintered wood, and walked down the hallway. I didn't look back. The air out here smelled like stale beer and cheap laundry detergent. It smelled like safety. I pulled out my own phone, an old encrypted burner I had bought yesterday with cash. I checked the live feed of the hidden camera I had installed in the vent above Leora's bed. The web was spinning. The spiders were in the jar. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was on the outside of the glass. I spent my first night out of the dorm in a roadside motel 2 towns over. The room smelled aggressively of industrial bleach and old stale cigarette smoke baked into the ugly floral curtains. The neon sign outside my window buzzed with a low, constant hum that vibrated right through the cheap glass and into my teeth. It was perfect. It was loud. It was dirty. And it was entirely off the radar of billionaires who sent black roses and hacked cell phones. I sat cross-legged on the lumpy mattress, eating cold French fries out of a greasy paper bag. My fingers were slick with oil and salt. In my lap, the burner phone glowed, illuminating my face in a harsh blue light. I was watching the live feed from the camera, hidden in the dorm's air vent. The audio was tinny compressed by the cheap microphone, but the picture was clear enough. Leora was sitting on the floor amidst the wreckage of our splintered door. She was crying. Her shoulders heaved in jagged, ugly spasms. For a second, a sharp pang of guilt twisted in my gut. It felt like swallowing a stone. I reached up my greasy fingertips, brushing the skin of my throat. I pressed down hard, feeling the steady rhythmic thud of my pulse. I had to remind myself I was alive. I had to remember the basement, the absolute suffocating terror of bleeding out on concrete, while men placed bets on how long my heart would hold out. The guilt dissolved, replaced by a cold, settling nausea. Leora wasn't crying because she was afraid. She was crying because her phone screen was shattered, and Christian had bricked her operating system. She was cut off. At 2 a.m., the feed showed the hallway light spilling into the room. Someone had pushed the broken door open. I stopped chewing. I leaned closer to the tiny screen, my breath fogging the glass. It wasn't Arthur. It wasn't Dominic. He moved with an unnatural, terrifying silence. A tall man in a tailored navy overcoat. He stepped over the splinters without looking down. Gabriel. My stomach plummeted, and I shoved the paper bag of fries off the bed. It hit the floor with a pathetic rustle. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the motel headboard. In my previous life, Gabriel was the cleaner. He was the one who made the police look the other way. He was the one who forged my signature on withdrawal papers. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just dissolved your existence with quiet, bureaucratic precision. He always smelled of wintergreen mints and dry cleaning chemicals. On the screen, Gabriel stood over Leora's sleeping form. She had crawled into bed an hour ago, exhausted by her own hysterics. He didn't wake her. He didn't touch her. He simply pulled up my old desk chair, the one I used to sit in for hours studying, and sat down beside her bed. He sat there for 3 hours. I watched him paralyzed. My bladder ached. My eyes burned from not blinking, but I couldn't look away. I watched a predator memorize its prey. He studied the way she breathed, the way her hair fell across her face. He was mapping her, finding the weak points. Just before dawn, Gabriel stood up. He reached into his overcoat and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. He set it perfectly square in the center of her cluttered desk, right next to the dead, shattered phone. Then he walked out, fading into the hallway shadows, as silently as he had arrived. When Leora woke up at 8 a.m., the camera caught her groggy confusion. She rubbed her eyes, complaining to the empty room about the cold draft from the broken door. Then she saw the box. I turned the volume up. The tinny hiss of the microphone filled the motel room. Leora scrambled out of bed, her oversized t-shirt clinging to her sweat-dampened skin. She grabbed the box. Her hands were shaking, but her face wasn't pale with dread. It was flushed with anticipation. She snapped the lid open. There was no ring inside. There was a tiny, sleek, silver USB drive. And folded beneath it, a crisp thick piece of stationery. She unfolded the note. She read it aloud, her voice a reedy whisper. Dominic will be arrested at 4 p.m. today. Arthur's wife knows about you. Christian servers are currently burning. Plug this in when you are ready to be protected. G. Leora dropped the note. She stared at the USB drive like it was a loaded gun. She didn't pack her bags. She didn't call the police. She walked over to her laptop, booted it up, and slid the drive into the port. I closed the burner phone. The screen went black. I pressed my palms against my eyes until bursts of static color bloomed behind my eyelids. She was in. She had accepted the terms of the war. 4 of them were on the board, and she thought she could navigate the minefield because they called her beautiful. I needed to move. The motel was safe, but my bank account was draining. I had to secure a vantage point that paid cash. I needed to be close enough to ensure the timeline was tracking, but invisible enough to survive the fallout. The St. Jude Children's Hospital Charity Gala was always held on the 3rd Saturday of October. In my last life, it was the night Arthur paraded me around like a prized mare, holding my elbow so tightly, his thumb left a yellowing bruise on my bone for 2 weeks. This time, I was wearing a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform that smelled faintly of industrial laundry detergent and someone else's nervous sweat. I had bribed a catering manager $50 to take the shift of a girl who had called in sick. It wasn't hard. Nobody looks at the catering staff. We are part of the architecture. We are the hands that hold the silver trays, nothing more. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was suffocating. The air was thick with the cloying scent of roasted duck heavy perfume and the sharp metallic tang of ozone from the massive, over-engineered lighting rigs. The heat of 300 bodies packed into expensive silk and velvet made the back of my neck prickle with sweat. I stood near the swinging doors of the kitchen, gripping a tray of sweating champagne flutes, the cut crystal dug into the pads of my fingers. And then she arrived. The double mahogany doors at the front of the ballroom opened, and the low hum of classical string music seemed to falter for a fraction of a second. Leora walked in. She looked immaculate, but entirely wrong. She was wearing a floor-length crimson gown that cost more than my entire life insurance policy. It was cut dangerously low, practically demanding the attention of every eye in the room. But it wasn't the dress that made her look wrong. It was her posture. Her shoulders were rigid. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, wide and panicked, like a rabbit dropped into a snake pit. She was clutching a small silver purse so tightly her knuckles were white. The USB drive was probably inside it. I adjusted my grip on the tray, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stayed in the shadows of a massive, gaudy ice sculpture of a swan. Arthur was the first to intercept her. He materialized from the crowd, his silver hair catching the chandelier light. He wore a tuxedo that fit him with predatory precision. He didn't smile. He stepped into her personal space, completely blocking her path. Even from 30 feet away, I could see Leora flinch. I remembered that flinch. I remembered the smell of his expensive cedar wood cologne, closing off my oxygen. He leaned down, whispering something in her ear. Leora shook her head rapidly, backing up a step. Before Arthur could grab her arm, the crowd parted again. "Arthur, you're hovering. It's terribly gauche." A new voice cut through the ambient noise. Smooth, warm, dripping with the kind of relaxed entitlement that takes 3 generations to cultivate. I peered through the hollow chest of the ice swan. Leo, man number 5. Leo was the golden boy. He had sun-kissed hair, a brilliant easy smile, and the kind of relaxed posture that made people trust him instantly. In the previous timeline, he was the one who offered me an escape. He hid me in his penthouse, brought me warm tea, and listened to me cry. It took me a month to realize the doors locked from the outside, and the tea was laced with a mild sedative. He liked to keep his pets sleepy. Leo approached Leora, flashing a dazzling smile. He completely ignored Arthur, stepping between them and offering Leora his arm. "You look entirely overwhelmed, darling," Leo said, loud enough for a few passing guests to hear. "Let me rescue you. I know where they keep the good scotch." Leora looked at Leo. She saw the smile. She saw the lifeboat. She practically threw herself at him, looping her arm through his. Arthur's jaw tightened. His eyes went dead and flat, but he didn't make a scene. He just nodded once slowly and melted back into the crowd of billionaires and politicians. I let out a shaky breath. Condensation dripped from a champagne flute onto my wrist, shocking me with the cold. Leo led Leora toward the grand balcony overlooking the city skyline. He was talking animatedly, making her laugh. A fragile, desperate kind of laugh. "Hey, Trey," a harsh whisper snapped my attention back. The catering manager, a red-faced man with a tight collar, shoved my shoulder. "Stop daydreaming and circulate. Table 4 needs refills." "Right. Sorry," I muttered, ducking my head. I moved into the throng of the party. The noise washed over me in a chaotic wave. Clinking silverware, the rustle of taffeta, the low, rumbling baritone of men discussing mergers that would bankrupt thousands. I kept my head down. I offered glasses to anonymous hands wrapped in Rolexes and tennis bracelets. As I circled the perimeter, nearing the balcony doors, a heavy hand slammed into the wall inches from my face. I froze. The champagne glasses on my tray rattled violently against each other. "Watch where you're going." The voice was rough, slurred with alcohol and raw aggression. I slowly turned my head. Dominic, he was leaning against the decorative pillar by the balcony entrance. He looked like absolute hell. His tuxedo jacket was missing. His white shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and he smelled like stale whiskey and copper. His knuckles were bruised and split. The arrest Gabriel had orchestrated must not have stuck, but it had clearly cost him. He wasn't looking at me. His feverish, bloodshot eyes were locked entirely on the balcony doors. Through the glass, I could see Leo wrapping his suit jacket around Leora's bare shoulders to ward off the October chill. Dominic's chest heaved. He was grinding his teeth so hard I could hear the enamel squeak over the sound of the string quartet. I held my breath. I didn't move a muscle. I was 2 feet away from the man who had painted my face in blood. He slowly pushed himself off the wall. He didn't even glance at the waitress, trembling with a tray of drinks. He just pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out onto the balcony. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the atmosphere on the terrace shifted violently. Even through the thick glass, I saw Leo's charming smile drop into a hard, aristocratic sneer. I saw Leora stumble backward, knocking into a potted ficus. I didn't stay to watch. I backed away, retreating into the crowd. I dumped my entire tray of full champagne glasses onto a busboy's cart, ignoring his hissed protest. I pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic heat of the kitchen. I stripped off the scratchy polyester vest and tossed it into a laundry bin. I kept walking out the service exit into the cold, damp alleyway behind the hotel. I leaned against the brick wall, gasping for air. The smell of rotting garbage and wet asphalt filled my lungs, and it was the sweetest thing I had ever breathed. 5 men. The board was filling up. They were all in the same room, and I was just a ghost in the alley. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket. I had one more camera to check, the one I had hidden in the dashboard of Arthur's town car, because Arthur never left a party early, unless he had a prize in the trunk. The alley behind the Grand Hotel smelled of wet cardboard sour beer and the sharp metallic tang of an approaching thunderstorm. The first fat drops of rain hit the asphalt, turning the greasy pavement into a slick black mirror. I shivered, pulling my thin cotton sweater tighter across my chest, but I didn't move from the shadows. I crouched behind a rusted dumpster, my back pressed against the weeping brick wall. My thumbs were numb, clumsily sliding across the cracked screen of my burner phone to pull up the feed from Arthur's town car. The camera I'd planted was a tiny adhesive dot jammed into the lip of the leather-wrapped air conditioning vent on the passenger side. The angle was slightly skewed, capturing the driver's white-gloved hands on the steering wheel and the vast, cavernous darkness of the Maybach's back seat. The feed was silent for 3 agonizing minutes, just the low, bass-heavy thrum of the idling engine. Then the rear door opened. The interior dome light clicked on, washing the back seat in a cold, clinical yellow glow. Arthur slid in. He didn't look like the polished, untouchable billionaire who had just commanded the ballroom floor. He looked feral. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a broken noose. A muscle in his jaw jumped in a rapid, erratic rhythm. "Drive," Arthur snapped. The driver didn't say a word. He just put the car in gear. As the car rolled out of the hotel's underground lot and into the glare of the city streetlights, the shifting shadows revealed that Arthur wasn't alone in the back. A man sat opposite him, slouched in the plush leather, with a careless, arrogant grace. He wore a faded olive Henley and dark cargo pants clothing that screamed blue-collar. Yet the watch on his wrist was a matte black tactical piece that cost more than a suburban house. Victor, man number 6. My breath hitched so sharply, I choked on the damp alley air. My vision swam. I dug my fingernails into the meat of my thigh, pressing hard until the sharp pain grounded me. In the basement, in that final, endless week of my first life, Victor wasn't the one who screamed at me. He wasn't the one who bought me diamonds or painted with my blood. He was the one who measured my caloric intake. He was the mercenary Arthur had hired to manage the logistics of my captivity. I remembered the smell of him gunpowder, unscented soap, and wintergreen chewing gum. He used to check my restraints with the bored, meticulous efficiency of a mechanic checking a fan belt. The utter absence of his empathy had terrified me more than Dominic's unhinged rage. "Leo Bancroft took her," Arthur said, staring out the tinted window. His voice was a low, vibrating hum of pure violence. "He's taking her to the glass house in the financial district." Victor didn't move. He sat in the shadows, slowly turning a heavy silver Zippo lighter over and over in his knuckles. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound carried through the tiny microphone, echoing in my earpiece like a metronome. The Bancroft penthouse. Victor's voice was like dragging a heavy stone over gravel. "That's a fortress, Arthur. Biometric locks, private elevators, armed security on the ground, and roof. You want me to pull a girl out of there on a Saturday night? It'll be loud." "I don't care if it's loud," Arthur snarled, finally, turning to look at Victor. The civilized veneer had completely eroded. His eyes were wide, the whites showing all the way around his irises. She was wearing my bracelet. She is mine. I want her out of that building before sunrise. Break the doors. Break Leo's jaw if he gets in the way. Just don't damage her. Victor stopped flipping the lighter. He leaned forward, catching the streetlights. He had a brutal square jaw and cold, dead eyes. My fee just tripled. Done. Arthur spat. Victor nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I'll need to mobilize a team. We hit the power grid for the block first. Disable the biometrics. Then we go up the elevator shafts. I watched the screen paralyzed. They were going to raid a billionaire's penthouse. They were going to plunge a city block into darkness, risk a shootout with private security, and drag Leora out by her hair, all because they were infected by the poison of that app. She brought this on herself. A tiny, bitter voice whispered in the back of my mind. She wanted the penthouse. She wanted the danger. Let her have it. But my stomach churned, heavy and acidic. I remembered the heavy steel door of the basement closing. I remembered the click of the deadbolt. Suddenly, Victor frowned. He tapped his phone screen, a deep crease forming between his brows. Arthur, Victor said, his voice dropping an octave. The car's GPS just went offline. Arthur blinked, pulling himself out of his violent reverie. What? We're on the highway. We have satellite. No, Victor said, sitting up straight, his entire demeanor shifting from bored contractor to apex predator. We don't. The car's onboard computer is locked. The doors are deadlocked. Before Arthur could try his door handle, the plush, leather-wrapped speakers of the Maybach crackled to life. Good evening, Arthur. The voice was digitized, scrubbed of all human warmth. Christian. Arthur's face contorted in absolute fury. He lunged at the privacy partition, dividing the front and back seats, pounding his fist against the bulletproof glass. Hayes, you miserable, cowardly little... I'm redirecting your vehicle. Christian's voice interrupted smoothly, cutting through Arthur's rage like a scalpel. The brakes and steering are currently routing through my servers. Your driver is merely a passenger now. You are going to a private hangar at the edge of the city. You will board a flight to Tokyo, and you will stay there for 6 months. If you try to break a window, I will drive this car into the nearest concrete overpass at 120 miles per hour. Victor didn't panic. He smoothly unholstered a matte black pistol from his waistband, checked the chamber, and looked at the car's speaker system. You can't hack the mechanical locks, Hayes. I can blow the latch. You could, Victor Christian replied. But I've also frozen your offshore accounts. Every cent you've bled from Arthur over the last 5 years is currently sitting in a holding server. Put the gun away and the money returns. Pull the trigger and you're destitute. Victor froze. For 5 agonizing seconds, he weighed the life of his employer against his bank account. Then, slowly, deliberately, Victor lowered the gun. He slid it back into its holster. He leaned back against the leather seat and popped a piece of wintergreen gum into his mouth. Victor! Arthur screamed, his voice cracking with panic and betrayal. I pay you. He pays me more, Victor said, flatly chewing. I hit the power button on the burner phone. The screen snapped black. I couldn't watch anymore. My knees gave out, and I slumped down into the wet garbage of the alley, my hands covering my mouth to stifle a hysterical, jagged sob. Christian had taken Arthur off the board in less than 5 minutes, without even being in the same zip code. He had neutralized Victor with a few lines of code. The scale of their power, the absolute crushing weight of their resources, it wasn't a game. It was a war of gods, and Leora was just a fleshy, bleeding pawn trapped in the center, and I was the one who had put her there. I pushed myself up from the dirty pavement. My hands were scraped and slick with rainwater. I needed to get back to the motel. I needed to lock the deadbolt and disappear under the cheap blankets. I thought I was a master manipulator because I swapped a photo. I was an ant playing with a nuclear launch code. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time I made it back to the roadside motel. I was soaked to the bone. My sneakers squeaked pathetically against the cheap, stained carpet of my room. The smell of mildew and ozone was suffocating. But I locked the flimsy deadbolt, slid the metal chain into place, and jammed a wooden chair under the doorknob. I stripped off my wet clothes, my skin pebbled with goosebumps, and pulled on an oversized gray sweatshirt. I was trembling so hard, my teeth clicked together. I grabbed a towel, vigorously drying my hair, and walked over to the bed. My burner phone sat exactly where I had left it on the nightstand, next to a plastic cup of stale water. I picked it up. I needed to check the dorm feed. I needed to see if Gabriel had returned, or if the room was still empty. I unlocked the screen and opened the surveillance app. The dorm room was dark. The broken door had been boarded up with a cheap piece of plywood by campus maintenance. Leora wasn't there. She was still with Leo in his glass fortress, or worse. I exhaled a long, ragged breath, letting my head fall back against the headboard. The silence in the motel room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. Buzz. The phone in my hand vibrated. It was a single, short burst. I frowned, looking down. I hadn't set up any alerts. This phone had no SIM card. It ran entirely on the motel's unsecured Wi-Fi through a VPN. The surveillance feed on the screen vanished. The app didn't crash. It was violently pushed aside. The screen went completely black. My heart stalled. A cold sweat broke out across my collarbones. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I pressed the power button. Nothing. The phone was entirely unresponsive. A warm brick of plastic and glass in my palm. Then a single line of text appeared in the center of the darkness. Simple white monospace font. I see you. I dropped the phone. It hit the mattress with a soft thud. I scrambled backward, scrambling over the tangled sheets until my back hit the wall. My lungs seized. I couldn't pull in oxygen. The air felt thick, like inhaling wet cotton. The phone buzzed again. I stared at it, like it was a venomous snake, coiled on my bed. It just lay there, the screen glowing faintly. Slowly, agonizingly, I crawled forward. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to grab my right wrist with my left hand, just to steady my fingers. I picked the phone back up. A new line of text had appeared, below the first. Leora doesn't flinch at the sound of the library bell. Leora doesn't drink her coffee black. Leora didn't take this photo. My stomach dropped into a bottomless gorge. Bile rose in the back of my throat, tasting like copper and sour coffee. He knows. Rowan, man number 7. In my previous life, Rowan was the phantom. He was the architect. He built Oubliette from the ground up. He didn't participate in the auctions, and he didn't bid on the girls. He just watched the data. He lived in the servers. He was a voyeur of human depravity, charting the psychological collapse of the women his app ensnared. When Arthur finally locked me in the basement, it was Rowan who had provided the soundproofing blueprints. Another line of text crawled across the screen. You altered the database. An amateur injection protocol. You changed the image hex code 4.2 seconds before she hit publish. Clever girl. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears of absolute profound terror leaking out and tracking down my cheeks. I thought I was off the grid. I thought my VPN, my cash purchases, my burner phone made me invisible. But to Rowan, I was just a fly, buzzing against a digital window pane. He saw the code. He saw the strings. They are fighting over a ghost. They want the girl from the library, the quiet one. I brought my trembling fingers to the keyboard. The standard digital keyboard had automatically popped up on the bottom half of the screen. He was giving me the floor. He wanted me to speak. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My thumbs hovered over the glass. "Leave me alone," I typed. My typing was slow, pathetic. "I'm not playing." The response was instantaneous. "You changed the pieces on the board. That makes you a player. Look out your window, Harper." A full-body shudder ripped through me. I dropped the phone again. I didn't want to look. Every survival instinct I had honed through 2 lifetimes screamed at me to hide under the bed, to crawl into the bathroom, and lock the door. But I couldn't resist the gravitational pull of the nightmare. I slid off the bed. My bare feet hit the cold, sticky carpet. I walked to the window, moving with the sluggish, heavy dread of a nightmare. The neon sign outside flickered, casting erratic blood-red shadows across the room. I reached out my fingers, hooking the edge of the stiff, floral curtain. I pulled it back an inch. Across the street, parked under the amber glow of a flickering street lamp, was a matte black surveillance van. It had no license plates. The engine was off, but the faint, bluish glow of multiple computer monitors bled through the dark tint of the windshield. A figure was sitting in the driver's seat. As I watched the driver's side window slowly rolled down, the rain poured in, but the man inside didn't care. Even through the rain and the distance, I could see the pale, gaunt angles of Rowan's face illuminated by the screen glow. He raised his hand. He wasn't waving. He held up his own phone, the screen facing me, glowing bright white in the darkness. My burner phone buzzed on the bed behind me. I didn't need to look at it to know what it said. The sanctuary was dead. The walls had fallen. The architect had found me. And now he had 2 mice in his maze instead of 1. I didn't hide. When the architect of your nightmare parks across the street and leaves the front door open running, only guarantees you'll die tired. I let the motel curtain fall shut. My legs felt like lead pipes, but I forced them to move. I slipped my wet sneakers back onto my bare feet. The damp canvas felt freezing and suffocating against my skin. I didn't grab a weapon. A pocket knife wouldn't save me from a man who could erase my social security number with a keystroke. I walked out of the motel room, leaving the door hanging open. The rain was deafening, a relentless, icy sheet that instantly plastered my gray sweatshirt to my skin. I crossed the black asphalt, the neon motel sign, reflecting in the deep puddles, staining the water the color of fresh blood. The side door of the matte black van slid open with a soft, hydraulic hiss as I approached. I stopped at the threshold. Heat rolled out from the interior, carrying the hyper-sterile smell of compressed air ozone and the sour tang of week-old black coffee. The back of the van was a cavern of glowing monitors, tangled black cables zip-tied to metal racks, and the low jet engine whine of cooling fans. Rowan sat in a swiveling leather chair, bolted to the floor. He didn't look like a god. He looked like a corpse that had been reanimated by Adderall in blue light. His skin was translucent, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. He wore a faded black t-shirt and had dark, bruised bags under his eyes. He didn't pull a gun. He just gestured to a small metal jump seat opposite him. "Sigh. Sit, Harper," he said. His voice was raspy, completely stripped of the booming, digitized authority Christian used. Rowan sounded tired. He sounded horribly, unsettlingly human. I climbed in. The door hissed shut behind me, instantly cutting off the sound of the rain. The silence inside the van was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. I sat rigidly on the metal edge of the seat water, pooling around my cheap sneakers. Rowan turned his chair, crossing his long legs. He studied me. Not the way Arthur did like a piece of meat, and not the way Dominic did like a blank canvas. Rowan looked at me the way a watchmaker looks at a gear that has suddenly started spinning backward. "You shouldn't exist," he said softly. He tapped a key on his central keyboard. A monitor flickered to life. It displayed my high school transcripts, my meager bank statements, and a photo of me at 7 years old, missing my front teeth. Harper Evans, a 3.2 GPA, a part-time job at a campus coffee shop, zero background in cryptography, zero history on the dark web. Yet you intercepted a localized packet upload and rewrote a hex code in 4.2 seconds. You bypassed a biometric lock on an encrypted app. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "How did you know what Leora was doing before she did it?" I stared at the screen, showing my childhood face. My heart beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs, but my voice came out dead and flat. "I guessed." Rowan smiled. It was a thin, bloodless stretching of his lips. "You know the game was getting incredibly boring. 5 men fighting over a girl who thinks she's starring in a romance novel. Leora is predictable. She runs to the highest bidder. She hides behind the broadest shoulders." He tapped another screen. The feed shifted to a chaotic scene. A sleek, modern penthouse apartment, Leo's glass house. But the glass was shattered. Rain whipped through the broken floor-to-ceiling windows. Private security guards lay unmoving on the expensive white rugs. Gabriel pulled Christian's leash. Christian crashed Leo's grid. Rowan narrated his eyes, reflecting the pale light of the destruction. And, while they were all busy throwing millions of dollars at each other to play King of the Mountain, the actual owner of the mountain walked in the back door. A cold spike of adrenaline pierced the base of my skull. "Maxwell," Rowan whispered. "Man number 8. The name didn't just surface in my memory. It violently tore its way out. Maxwell wasn't a tech bro. He wasn't old money. Maxwell was a ghost who trafficked in human misery. He was the man who owned the soundproof basement. In my last life, when Arthur grew tired of my screaming, he sold me to Maxwell to recoup his losses. Maxwell was the man who tasted like peppermint and stale cigars, the man who held my jaw while I choked on my own blood. On Rowan's monitor, a grainy security feed showed the service elevator of Leo's building. A massive man in a simple black raincoat was dragging a thrashing, screaming Leora by her hair. She was missing a shoe. Her red dress was torn. "Maxwell doesn't play the dating game," Rowan said, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "He takes the leftovers when the children are done breaking their toys. He's taking her to the warehouse district, to the basement." My lungs seized. I could smell the damp concrete. I could feel the zip ties cutting into my wrists, slicing through the skin until they scraped bone. I gripped the edges of the metal jump seat so hard my knuckles popped. "Why are you showing me this?" I breathed, my voice barely audible over the hum of the servers. Rowan tilted his head. "Because you're the anomaly, Harper. You changed the board, but you didn't leave the room. You're watching them. You hate her, don't you? Your roommate. You swapped the photo because you knew what would happen. You wanted her to be punished. He spun his chair, facing his massive array of monitors. I can unlock the doors to the basement. I can send Gabriel's exact coordinates to the police. I can save Leora right now. He looked back at me over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with a sick, detached curiosity. Or I can delete the footage, wipe the servers, and let Maxwell keep her. I'll let you decide, Harper. Show me what kind of monster you really are. The offer hung in the sterile ozone-scented air of the van. Save the girl who used my face as bait. Save the girl who threw me to the wolves because she wanted a diamond bracelet. Or let her burn. Let her scream until her vocal cords snap. Let her choke on the copper-tasting blood that I had choked on. I looked at the monitor. Leora's face was pressed against the dirty floor of the service elevator, her mouth open in a silent, jagged scream of pure, absolute terror. She wasn't manic anymore. The vanity was gone. There was only the animal realization of impending death. I closed my eyes. The phantom pain in my throat flared hot and sharp. I hated her. God, I hated her so much, it felt like a physical weight in my chest. But if I let Maxwell take her, if I sat in this van and gave the thumbs up to a snuff film, I wasn't just surviving. I was becoming them. I was taking a seat at their table. I opened my eyes. I didn't look at the monitor. I looked at Rowan. You think you're outside the glass, don't you? I said, my voice steadying, hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. You think you're just the architect. Rowan frowned slightly, his fingers pausing over his keyboard. I am the architect. No, I said, slowly standing up. My wet sneakers left dark footprints on the metal floor. You're a loose end. I didn't lunge at him. I didn't try to hit him. As I stood, I reached into the pocket of my soaked sweatshirt and pulled out the small, sleek, silver USB drive. Rowan's eyes darted to it. His confident posture faltered. It was the drive Gabriel had given Leora, the one with the blackmail, the server access, the kill switches. When Leora had dropped her purse in the hotel ballroom, while fleeing with Leo, I hadn't just walked past it. I had picked it up. I had taken the only piece of actual power on the board. Before Rowan could react, before he could reach for the weapon he undoubtedly had hidden beneath his desk, I slammed the USB drive into the open port of his primary routing tower. What are you doing? Rowan shouted, scrambling out of his chair. Changing the board, I spat. I didn't know how to code. Rowan was right about that. But Gabriel's drive wasn't a puzzle. It was an automated wrecking ball. The moment the metal connected, Rowan's screens violently flickered. The clean, organized lines of code dissolved into a chaotic cascade of red error messages. You stupid bitch. Rowan lunged at me, his calm, voyeuristic facade entirely shattering. His hands clamped around my throat. Panic exploded in my chest, but I didn't freeze. The memory of the basement didn't paralyze me. It fueled a desperate, rabid survival instinct. I brought my knee up, driving it as hard as I could into his groin. Rowan gagged his grip, loosening just enough for me to twist away. He stumbled backward, crashing into a rack of servers. I didn't look back. I hit the manual release on the sliding door and threw myself out into the pouring rain. I hit the asphalt hard, scraping my palms, the pain sharp and brilliantly, wonderfully real. I scrambled to my feet. Behind me, the van's interior was flashing with aggressive red light. Alarms were blaring over the sound of the storm. Gabriel's drive didn't just shut down Oubliette. It triggered a mass unencrypted broadcast. It took the GPS coordinates of Maxwell's basement, attached a live feed of Leora being dragged inside, and mass emailed it to every single user on the app, It sent it to Arthur's mercenaries. It sent it to Dominic's unhinged burner phones. It sent it to Christian's automated drones. I didn't save Leora by calling the cops. I saved Leora by dropping a bleeding piece of meat in the center of the arena and opening all the cages at once. I walked away. I didn't run. The rain washed the blood from my scraped palms. An hour later, I was sitting in a fluorescent-lit 24-hour diner, 3 miles away from the motel. The air smelled of stale grease bleach and burnt coffee. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. I sat in a vinyl booth, nursing a mug of cheap, bitter drip coffee. The ceramic was thick and chipped, burning my hands in a way that grounded me to the earth. A small muted television mounted above the diner counter was playing the local news. Breaking news out of the warehouse district tonight. A massive police presence following reports of an unprecedented gangland-style shootout. Authorities are calling it a war zone, with reports of private military contractors and multiple high-net-worth individuals involved. Details are still emerging, but paramedics have reportedly extracted a young woman from the scene. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It tasted like ash and sugar. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, but they were clean. They weren't tied. My throat was whole. I didn't feel like a hero. A hero would have gone to the police on day one. A hero wouldn't have let 8 men tear a city apart just to ensure her own ghost remained buried. But I wasn't trying to be a savior. I just wanted to breathe. I set the mug down. I pulled a $20 bill from my pocket, cash untraceable, and slid it under the sugar dispenser. I stood up, pushing open the glass door of the diner. The rain had stopped. The air was cold, sharp, and empty. The sky was beginning to bleed into a pale, bruised purple, the first light of a morning I was never supposed to see. I zipped up my damp sweatshirt, put my hands in my pockets, and started walking down the empty highway, finally letting the dead stay dead. Harper didn't just survive the game. She shattered the board and let the monsters eat each other. Sometimes rebirth isn't about becoming a hero. It's about learning exactly how to wield the poison that killed you. If you love this dark psychological dive into revenge and survival, smash that like button, share this story with someone who loves a twisted ending, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our deep dive narratives. What would you have done in Harper's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe out there and see you next time.